Hey, welcome back to the Spector Creative channel where we talk toys. I've been a brand manager, marketing director in the toy industry for many, many years. My name is Toy Guru Neitlich, and I'm also an adult collector myself. I collect toys. And I want to make a video today about toys and weapons. Okay, I know, controversial subject. We'll just get that out of the way. And there's a lot that could be just said about appropriate toys with weapons and inappropriate toys with weapons. I suppose the younger a toy skews, the less appropriate it is to have a weapon. But honestly, playing with weapons and playing soldier, if you will, is a play pattern that goes back hundreds and thousands of years. Romans, Egyptians, kids were playing soldier for many, many centuries. Kind of the two ways to play are you've got your role play with your actual weapons and then your doinky doink play with your figurines. And toy companies, ever since mass production started in the early 20th century, guns and weapons and role-play items that, well, spur violence, shall we say, have been a mainstay of even major toy companies. Mattel prided itself on its M16 Marauder gun that was one of the best for its time. And while a lot of toy guns, quote-unquote, have really become water and Nerf guns over the last few years as anti-gun sentiment takes a formal place in society, there's definitely no lack of weapons, be it guns, swords, knives, hooks, all sorts of things. Well, I mean, why is this? They're fun. I mean, weapons are fun, especially for kids. And while it's extremely controversial, and the idea of a child playing with a gun, I mean, there's obviously the Freudian angle of, having a gun that shoots out a projectile and the way that's reflective in the ego and superego, but not going to get into that one on this YouTube video. I'm sure there's been tons of those. But violence, if you will, is a legitimate play pattern. Look at Sid from Toy Story. He is one of the most creative characters in the movie, but all of his play revolves around being violent towards his toys. I'm not saying violence towards toys is a healthy thing. I'm just saying it's a large category. And companies have had different ways of dealing with this. For example, there have been Marvel Legend figures like this Black Widow where the guns were permanently part of her holster, or rather, she was, I think, you couldn't actually put them in her hands the way she has in the movie. And I remember asking Jesse Falcon about this at a meeting with Marvel, and he basically said, yeah, you don't believe in putting guns with toys, which is understandable. I mean, toys have hurt children when they have gun-like features, like projectiles. This is the Battlestar Galactica Colonial Viper from the early 80s, and this was the toy that was actually responsible for the missile-firing Boba Fett from Kenner to have the missile-firing mechanism canceled, because this toy unfortunately led to a child's death when the missile unfortunately went off in their mouth. The toy was later reissued where the missile was not included, and a big part of this was the increase in safety around toys that percolated throughout the 80s, really from Edward Schwartz's book, Toys That Kill, which, although it did do a little cherry picking, it pointed out the lack of safety, and that's what led to a lot of safety regulations in the 90s and 2000s. Now, as far as projectiles as role-play items, one of the ways toy companies have adapted is by making sure anything that sort of shoots a projectile is foam-based or a simple ball. And they're made with very, very bright colors to, one, inform law enforcement that it's not an actual weapon, and two, it does increase the play value. And, if you've got a yellow slingshot and you're shooting an emoji piece of poo, let's go with poo, that's fun for a child. What child doesn't like to throw poo? I mean, maybe monkey children. But yeah, whether it's a suction cup or poo or something that's made of foam or a ball, toy companies have made a very deliberate effort to increase safety in anything that's a projectile. Now, what do you do when you have an action figure that shoots a projectile? We've already seen how the Battlestar Galactica Viper ship was an issue, and that was corrected simply by removing it. This Robin Hood figure from the Prince of Thieves collection, you could actually shoot the arrow like a slingshot. Previous Robin Hood figures, the arrow was molded into the actual bow, like with these Slug figures, or some of the action figures that came out in the 1970s. But that Kevin Costner Robin Hood actually allowed kids to shoot out an arrow. And that became an issue. And that became sort of a backlash to any action figure that was sort of an archer-related character. Toy companies have definitely taken different approaches to how they deal with action figure accessories that can actually launch a weapon. This Lord of the Rings 2-pack with Boromir and Lurtz, one of the Uruk-hai from the first film Fellowship, had an unbelievable action feature. The mechanism inside of the body, when you pressed a switch on the back, it actually pulled back on the arm or the hand gripping the arrow, and this character could actually launch an arrow by pulling back on his bow, like an actual archer. It was pretty amazing, but it did shoot an arrow through the air, and this becomes an issue, because when an action figure becomes a projectile launcher, well, it will get classified as a slingshot. I know it's not literally a slingshot, but that's how the toy industry regulates itself, and that requires a lot of safety warnings and a lot of, well, legal issues surrounding the toy. And toy companies tend to view this as an unnecessary risk. Why should they risk themselves to have a figure with a projectile when there's other solutions? For example, when I worked at Mattel and oversaw the DC Universe Classics line, one of the notorious fan issues, shall we say, was how we handled Green Arrow, by having the arrow lodged permanently in his bow. Previous Green Arrow figures that Mattel had done, they came with a bow and arrow, but there was no string. It was just, well, it was kind of like Shaft's bow or from Youngblood from the 90s, where there was no string. It was like a gravity pullback, I think, that he had. I don't know, I forget. Rob Liefeld had some crazy cool stuff. But yeah, doing figures either without bows or without strings, or again, by putting an arrow lodged permanently between the bow and the string, it canceled out the slingshot aspect, and it was no longer a weapon. It was now just an accessory that a figure could hold. Although you kind of wish we had done this, like where he's pulling back on the string, if it was going to be permanently lodged in that. Even after I left Mattel, they continued to do this, the new brand team, where subsequent figures that had bow and arrows, it would come lodged together. Now, DC Direct doesn't need to do this because DC Direct isn't sold in toy stores. They're sold in comic book shops, and usually they're age-graded, either 16 plus, 18 plus, adult collector. So anything that's sold online or is not directly marketed to children, even if it looks like it's really friendly for kids, can usually get around the whole projectile launching issue because, well, once you age grade something 18 plus or make it only available for adult collectors, you no longer have to regulate it. One of the ways we got around this cleverly, I have to say, at Mattel with the Masters of the Universe Classics line with its token archer bow from the She-Ra Princess of Power line, was by having the actual bow included with the figure. It didn't have the arrow, or I'm sorry, the string that was permanently there. So you could obviously just kind of sort of pretend there was a string, and his hand was molded to hold the arrow between two gripping fingers. But we very deliberately had two hooks on the top and bottom of the bow, allowing the consumer to put their own piece of string there, since we knew most of the people buying this figure were going to just display it on their shelf and weren't actually going to be what's called doinky doink play, which is when kids play with action figures and, kind of smash them together. That's sort of the technical term that the action figure industry uses for that type of play. So by doing the self-created string here for bow, it avoided, we hoped, having angry fans. I mean, fans were angry, of course. There's always going to be angry fans. Heck, we had angry fans when we sent Ghostbuster fans a free glow-in-the-dark Slimer. People got upset over that. But having angry fans, it's a lot better than a huge lawsuit. And there's mitigated risk. Why should a toy company spend all of this time and energy to ensure that a action figure with a bow and arrow can shoot an arrow? Now, granted, you may be leaving money on the floor because we're not just talking about archers here, we're talking about any character that has a weapon. And there are more and more characters these days that are armed, either with swords or guns or guitar weapons. Sure, why not? But this is an ongoing issue. And there are some characters that are so identified with weapons and with assault weapons and guns that you really have a hard time putting them out at market, especially for kids, at a retail store, at a major, a big box store, if you will, and not including the guns. One kind of clever way Hasbro did this with a recent Punisher figure is it came with like a giant oversized bazooka, not so much a handgun, and it was just called like a combat assault accessory or something, so they didn't have to call it a gun. So yeah, combat weapon, not a gun. But the Punisher is, known as a character with guns. So what's the solution? Well, parent your child. It's up to the parents. And if you don't feel comfortable with an action figure that has an accessory that promotes violence, don't buy it for your child. It's as simple as that. Expecting that toy companies are just going to stop producing action figures that come with guns as an accessory, honestly, maybe politically incorrect to say this, but that's kind of an unreasonable expectation. Well, how do I know this? I was at a presentation once on a new product line from Marvel, and the vice president who got up to speak didn't know who he was, but he said, one of the things we really like the Punisher. We want to make everyone in the sales floor or the sales room here aware of this character. And why do we like the Punisher so much? He sells really well. And that basically sums it up right there. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it's a controversial subject, but it should be talked about. Guns, bow and arrow, swords, action figures, kids. What are your thoughts? Do you keep these away from your children? Love to know in the comments below. Thanks for posting, and I'll see you guys next time.